So, a long time ago, I played a game on my channel called Clash of Monsters, a fighting horror game that included some of your favourite characters, you know, Nosferatu, the Headless Horseman, Bride of Dracula, Bones, you know, the iconic horror character, Bones the Skeleton. Anyone? Anyway, that game was something to be desired, let's say, but that game was and still is free. You can find it on Steam today and play it for yourselves. But that got me thinking, what if we actually got a fully licensed horror fighting game? Like, can you imagine Art the Clown fighting Freddy Krueger outside of Michael Myers' home, or Candyman versus Valak outside of Crystal Lake? Like, that would be insane. In this video, I would like to go into how it would work, who would be in the game, what problems could it face in development, and the likelihood of it ever being made. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, we all know the standard formula for a fighting game. Life bars on the top, 1v1, first out of 2 or 3 rounds wins, and that's the basics of a fighting game, right? Now, we could go down the old school route back in the day where we had 2D sprite fighting games similar to Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. I actually did find on Steam a 2D sprite making software where you could make a fighting game in the style of Smash Bros. For anyone interested, it's called Smack Studios. There's also the very popular engine Mugen, which has been going since 1998. By the way, this engine is so insane. I've seen people make Peter Griffin, CJ from GTA, and even Ronald McDonald in this thing. It's what people call the infinite fighting game. Also, I just found out they've made a successor to this engine called Eichmann. So the capabilities for a 2D fan game are already there. But I don't want a 2D fan game. I want an authentic game by a licensed publisher and a licensed developer. So if we're going to do this right, we're going to go full 3D. We're going to use Unreal Engine. Now, before people start getting angry in the comments about saying, oh, we should use this engine and we should use that engine, Mortal Kombat, Injustice, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Tekken all use or have used Unreal Engine in recent years. Some of them have custom engines now, but a lot of them have used Unreal for a long time. And also, with Unreal being updated a lot of the time, and also how realistic some games in Unreal Engine are being made now, I think for the authentic horror gore experience, we need to use a really good engine, and I think Unreal is the one that we're going to use. I mean, it's nice having the nice engine, it's nice to have the tools we need to make the game, but we need someone who understands the audience, someone who understands how we work, not as fighting fans, but as horror fans. And I think the only people in the world we could use for this are NetherRealm Studios. And if you're unfamiliar with that, those are the guys that gave us Mortal Kombat, and they understand exactly how we like our gore, we like our brutality, and we like our pain. And they also have a track record of using horror characters in their games anyway. We've had Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Bubba, a Xenomorph, the Predator. We've had so many characters that have gone into the MK-verse. And if you guys still aren't convinced, don't forget a couple years ago we got Mortal Kombat versus DC, which I think then inspired the Injustice games anyway. So it just seems to be a trend now that, like, if something goes into the MK-verse, it sticks. Or you guys could just watch the Dead Meat Royal Rumble every year like I do. And if you guys could be so nice and send this video to those guys, I'd appreciate it. Okay, love you. Back to the video. So the problem I have with most fighting games is that their stories are kind of generic, you know, fight into a tournament to the death, or to prove you're the best, you win a prize or you become a savior, that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying that all fighting games have a generic story, but most of the modern ones have a good story, but it's after years and years of building on the story. The Tekken story is so intricate and so all over the place. Same with the Mortal Kombat lore. But trying to make a fresh new story, we need to try and be at modern standards today to keep up with the competition. But I feel like with this, we need to try and take a page out of maybe Injustice's book, or maybe even a closer relative. Let's look into Dead by Daylight. Now, Dead by Daylight has a story. It is just very complex. But from what I could tell by researching and speaking to my fiance, who is a Dead by Daylight fan, is that there is some sort of entity and this other world where killers basically go and kill players in like some sort of limbo state. I feel like we would need a multiverse sort of event where some higher being playing God would take these characters from all their separate universes and throw them into a tournament. They all have their own endings, and there is never actually a true canon ending to the game. The ending is what you get is what you get. Or I could make it a bit more like Injustice, where it follows a narrative structure of a main story where you swap between, I guess, protagonists we'll call our killers in this, where you swap between them. Maybe some side with the entity and maybe some don't side with the entity. Maybe some just don't care and want to basically be the best. And maybe there's alliances along the way, allegiances. And then maybe for a bit of flavour, maybe have fights where if you win the fight, something happens, and if you lose the fight, something happens. So there's multiple playthroughs that need to be played for you to get certain endings, kind of like a pick your own choice sort of game, but it's more a case of, hey, you win or you lose, and some of the fights are harder, some of the fights are easier, and that affects the outcome of the story. And maybe there is a canon story at the end, but maybe it could be like 1 of 5, 1 of 10. Just a reason for people to come back and play more. I feel like the whole crossover aspect really works for us in this case, because we've already seen it in movies such as Freddy vs. Jason or Alien vs. Predator, but also don't forget the comic Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. I think it's always been a topic of discussion which killer can beat what killer in what sort of situation. So I feel like that leans really well into the story. And even at the end, maybe you fight the big bad entity and then you go home, kind of like a final boss sort of thing. But I also feel like a really cool thing to add would be if certain characters fight somebody, then certain dialogue is exchanged. And I've seen that in other games before, and it's always been really funny to see. But now we're on the topic of characters, let's talk about the roster and the stages in the game, which I feel like a lot of people really want to talk about. Right, now we've got the developers and the story out the way, I think it's time to talk about everyone's favourite thing, the characters and the stages. I think we already know some of the main people who are going to be in this game. I've only mentioned them like 5 or 6 times in this video. But to be honest, with how expansive the horror genre is, from your classic movies from the 80s to your B-movie monster movies to your original black and white Universal monster movies, plus the rising popularity of cult movies and also online content and subscription services like Shudder. Please sponsor a video, please. To be honest, our roster could be absolutely ginormous. Most modern fighting games only have a roster of 40 plus characters. One of my favourite fighting games of all time, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, has a staggering 161 characters, and that was made back on the PS2 days, though the highest recorded roster was Fire Pro Wrestling The Return on PS2. But I think 40 is doable, but it could jump into the hundreds, to be honest. Who would you guys want to see in the roster, and what fight would you want to see the most? Let me know in the comments below. I think most characters would have a stage that's also attached to them. Imagine Freddy Krueger's iconic boiler room, Friday the 13th's Crystal Lake, the Nostromo from Alien, the Well from The Ring, and so much more. Some stages might not even have a character attached to them. Like imagine being on the boat that Bruce the Shark from Jaws circles around the boat while you fight on it, or iconic real-world locations like the Amityville house. I also think having interactable environments similar to Injustice or Mortal Kombat, where you could throw someone into something or pull out an item from the ground and hit them with it, that would be amazing. Like imagine kicking someone into Bruce the Shark while you're on that boat from Jaws. I also think a really cool thing to have would be that characters have multiple skins. Like imagine for Freddy we have normal Freddy Krueger, Super Freddy, the remake Freddy, Wes Craven's New Nightmare Freddy, or for Jason, all the iterations of Jason with his hockey mask, Jason X, or the one where he has a bag on his head. And there's so many others that could be on the skins list, with a stacked roster ranging from the classic slashers from Universal monster movies, also having the protagonist as playable characters like Ellen Ripley, Ash Williams, Laurie Strode. I don't think there would be any shortage of characters in the game. And with this game being made by NetherRealm Studios, you best believe that every single character would get their own set of spam attacks, and most importantly, their own fatalities. Though I would change it to something like executions for legal reasons. Needless to say, this game would be a PEGI 18 or a mature for my American audience. Now we've got the characters sorted, the story sorted. We haven't really touched on the gameplay, but we're going to do that now. For an additional bit of flavour, I think the game could have a tag mode, similar to Tekken Tag Tournament, or maybe you could have 5v5. like similar to like a Marvel versus Capcom thing. Game modes could consist of standard story mode stuff, which we've already touched on, arcade mode with thrown-in challenges such as 1v2 or fight on half health, survival mode where you could keep fighting until you have beaten the entire roster or until you die, your standard training mode, and as I was recording this video, I just thought maybe having a gallery mode that would have like concept art and 3D models, but also a bit like Dead by Daylight, a summary of who the character is, their backstory, their attached movie franchises, how many movies they're in, and just stuff like that, general sort of knowledge, and maybe have like a little bit of trivia in there as well. Or maybe go back to the old school PS2 days where you actually had videos attached or voice lines from the characters. So maybe some interviews with iconic horror characters. And obviously the one thing I haven't talked about at all would be online gameplay. Now we could do a few different things, taking some ideas from Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi, having tournament modes in the game, and maybe you get XP for your character where you could then maybe get cosmetics for your character. Maybe when you fight online you get XP which you could use on customizing your characters. Maybe if you have a main where you can get customizables, or like a lot of wrestling games and a lot of other games, make a character creator where you could take certain moves from certain individuals. So you could have base moves of Jason but the fatality of Freddy Krueger. You could also wear iconic clothes like Freddy's sweater, the hook hand from Candyman, and so much more. If you guys can think of any other cool game modes, let me know. But I also feel like online gameplay would be something where we would have to balance the characters, make sure that no characters are OP. That would be something we would have to look into. So as I was talking before about balancing and stuff like that, I think another thing to look into would be to have consistent updates. Looking at things like Dead by Daylight and how that has stood the test of time is that they regularly update every few months, and they also have a roadmap. So they always have an idea of this is going to be released and this is going to be released, and people get excited. So building the hype that new killers could be added, new stages and stuff like that, that would be cool. Maybe new chapters like Fortnite. Look at how consistent they have been, and also the variety of what they've added. They've added Goku and Vegeta, Hatsune Miku, and even Harry Kane from the England squad. I have no idea why that is, just thought it was a bit weird, wanted to bring that up. But my point is, consistency keeps players coming back. You can always tell when a new killer is released in Dead by Daylight. The numbers go up and then it stagnates and goes back down again. So having regular content updates brings people back, and there's also balancing and stuff like that. So DLC would be a giant thing for this game. And what could DLC be? It could be story DLC where we add in new characters and they have like a little attached on story, or new stages, new skins, new fighters would be the big one. So what could we add? I mean, I've already spoke about it, but bring in the Universal Monsters pack, Dracula, the Wolfman, Invisible Man, Creatures from Black Lagoon, and maybe make coloured versions and black and white versions and use some of their iconic maps. Maybe have like a filter added on so every character could be in black and white. We've already talked about Dead by Daylight, throw them in there. They've got so many original killers, and considering that Dead by Daylight are like the king of getting licenses signed, there could be a beautiful partnership in there. And some other additions could be like the Creepypasta collection, the Internet collection, where there's just like stories offline where we could throw people in. There's a lot of things we could throw in there. And with new horror films coming out every year, you could do collabs and partnerships with Shudder, Blumhouse, and so many more, where you could get that character as a playable character, teasing the release of a new film or a new series. So there's a lot there with collaboration to also make the game relevant, up to date, and still getting people to come back and play the game. Now I've sold you the dream sales pitch in the meeting boardroom in front of all the investors, getting ready to sign the checks, dot the T's, cross the I's, all that sort of stuff. I think it's time to talk about the problems this game could and would face in active development. I think the most obvious one is licensing. If you think about the amount of characters on the roster just on base, so 40 characters, there's already a legal hell waiting to happen. And to be honest, I'm talking about real world experience, with the most recent one being Friday the 13th. There was a lawsuit that went on for years with Friday the 13th that I think got the Friday the 13th game shut down, didn't have any more updates, and we've not had a Friday the 13th movie since 2009, and we've not had a new game since 2017. Though, little side update, I know they're working on another game, I think, and There's also the Crystal Lake series coming out, so again, but we could tie that to the game if that ever got made. But again, back to the problems. As well, you got to remember that some people's price would be higher than others, so negotiations would take a lot of time. And you also have to take into account that some people own multiple properties. I think Warner Brothers own the Conjuring universe, It, 13 Ghosts, and so much more. And it might be cost per intellectual property, so something might cost more, so you'd have to make a package deal. Not to mention a lot of film studios own separate movies of the same franchise, so depending on which version of the character you would like to use, you would have to talk to the appropriate body to get this added to the game. And with franchises changing hands all the time, you don't know what they would own and what the other person would own. You could spend more time getting the licenses and getting fees sorted rather than actually making the game. And speaking of licensing fees, that would be a big thing as well. Rev share, what you could and couldn't use depending on what you've signed for. Doing that for 40 to 100 characters would just make your head spin and blow your budget of the game way in advance. Another problem the game would probably face would be fan demand. Would there be enough demand for this game to be made? Fighting games are just one of many genres in the gaming scene, though both the horror community and the fighting game community are super lovely and welcoming. Much like most communities, they are also fickle and stubborn. I should know, I'm a fan of both sides. Some people love Smash Bros, some don't. Some people love Tekken, some don't. Established franchises that have stood the test of time are still great today and have esports tournaments attached to them and have a thriving, active community. Trying to pull people away from that to play something else is hard enough. There are so many one-hit wonder fighting games that never broke into the fighting scene. If you guys ever want me to do a deep dive into some dead franchises or one-hit wonder games, let me know. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the video. But to be honest, this doesn't just happen to fighting games, it happens to all sorts of games. Similar games to Dead by Daylight had been made but are quickly forgotten about. Like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, quickly came out, quickly went under the radar. Friday the 13th had the same problem, so did Evil Dead, so did Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Not to say that there isn't a loyal fan base for these games, but numbers speak for themselves, and that's what investors will be looking for. Are people actually going to play this game? And I feel like with this game, if you don't like horror, you aren't going to buy it. Also, most people these days won't drop $50 on a brand new game. If they already have something that's similar that they love, why would they turn off to go play something else? If the right influencer plays your game or streams it, maybe you have a chance. And it also depends on the level of horror fan. Some people like modern, some people like classic. Finding the balance of the right characters and getting the combat perfect would be essential, but people might just prefer DLC packs for Mortal Kombat like we have seen in the past. I think trying to sell this game with its legal troubles, small community demand, and trying to keep players actively engaged would just lose the game money. The best we could hope for would be a surge in players every time a DLC pack is released and maps are added as well. I feel like the best we could hope for, personally, is that we would release the game. The game would hit peak players, but then it would drop off and people would go back to playing Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. Then you release a DLC pack. Maybe it would have a cult following where we'd have like a strong independent community, but to keep up with the big boys, I don't think there is anywhere near as much demand for this game as we would want, and that's why the game would ultimately fail. I think the final question now would be, will it ever get made? And the short answer, to be honest, is no. Though the concept is good and the visuals and combat would be perfect, I think the legal troubles, small fan base, small game demand, and the upkeep it would take to make this a game that people would keep playing would just be too much. The licensing alone would probably flush out a lot of the budget. And like I say, trying to pull people away when they're playing something that's established for a very high price of $50, maybe $60, $70 at this point, with the way the industry is. I feel like personally as well, like if I saw this game and it's $50, I don't think me personally I could drop $50 on a game I've never heard of. I feel like I would have to wait for a Steam sale to pop up, go into CD keys and get the price down just to play this game. As much as I would want to play it, I don't think most people would invest in a brand new game of something they aren't fully ready to trust, because I have been stiff so many times buying games on Steam that don't deliver, and it breaks the gamer's trust, so I feel like there would just not be enough security for people to buy this. However, it's not all doom and gloom. Modders and open source game engines exist. Make a 2D fan game in Mugen. and add your own characters, or reskin animated modded versions of previous characters in already established 3D games. There's plenty of Pokemon ROMs out there and passion projects that people will invest the time in, so I'm pretty sure that someone would probably or already has made this fan game somewhere and no one is talking about it. And personally, if people could make that, I would love it. I would love to play a 2D fan horror fighting game made by the fans for the fans. I feel like that's the only way we could get this ever made. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Write down in the comments below the title of this theoretical game and I'll pick the best ones. And also write down in the comments who you would want to see fight, the game stages, and maybe even come up with more gaming concept videos together. Hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I'll see you guys around for the next one. Take care and goodbye.